November the 8th, 1942, 2 a.m., somewhere off the coast of French Morocco. In the cramped troop compartment of USS Samuel Chase, Private Robert Simons of the 1st Infantry Division clutched an unfamiliar weapon that would change armoured warfare forever. The tube-shaped device, officially designated the M1 rocket launcher, but universally called the Bazooka after a musical instrument used by radio comedian Bob Burns, had been issued to his squad just 72 hours earlier. Simons had fired exactly 3 practice rounds during a hasty training session on the ship's deck. Now, as landing craft engines roared to life and sailors shouted orders through the pre-dawn darkness, he was about to take this untested weapon into combat against the most feared armoured force on Earth. The German Afrika Korps and their French Vichy allies operated over 400 tanks across North Africa, including the formidable Panzer IV with 80mm of frontal armour. American infantry possessed exactly 0 weapons capable of stopping these machines. The standard anti-tank rifle, the bolt-action boys rifle borrowed from the British, could barely scratch paint on modern tank armour. The 37mm anti-tank gun, nicknamed the pea-shooter by bitter troops who had watched its rounds bounce harmlessly off German Panzers, was obsolete before America entered the war. Against French Renault and Hotchkiss tanks, maybe the 37mm stood a chance. Against German armour, American infantrymen were defenceless, except for the bazooka. The weapon Simons carried represented a revolutionary concept in military technology. Instead of relying on kinetic energy, the velocity of a projectile to penetrate armour, the bazooka used a shaped charge warhead that focused explosive energy into a superheated jet of metal capable of burning through steel like a cutting torch. The physics were exotic. The execution was brilliantly simple: a smoothbore steel tube, a rocket-propelled grenade, a basic electrical firing circuit, total weight 13 pounds, cost per unit approximately $60, capability penetrating 4 inches of hardened steel armour at ranges up to 400 yards. The bazooka's development had been a desperate race against time. In June 1940, as German panzers crushed French resistance, American ordnance officers realized with horror that the United States possessed no effective infantry anti-tank weapon. The 37mm gun required a crew, a vehicle to tow it, and precious minutes to set up. By the time crews could unlimber and aim, German tanks would have overrun their positions. What American infantry needed was a weapon one man could carry, one man could fire, and one man could use to kill a tank. The answer came from an unlikely source. Captain Leslie Skinner, an ordnance officer stationed at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, had been experimenting with rocket propulsion for years. In 1940, working with Dr. Clarence Hickman, a physicist who had developed rocket weapons for the Navy, Skinner created a handheld rocket launcher, using a design so simple it seemed almost primitive. A tube open at both ends, a rocket inserted from the rear, an electrical ignition system triggered by a pistol grip. When fired, the rocket's motor would exhaust harmlessly behind the shooter while the projectile flew toward its target. The shaped charge warhead was even more revolutionary. Based on the Monroe effect discovered in the 1880s but not weaponized until the late 1930s, the warhead used a conical copper liner backed by high explosive. Upon impact, the explosive detonation collapsed the copper cone into a hypersonic jet of molten metal traveling at over 25,000 feet per second. This jet, thinner than a pencil but carrying immense energy, could pierce armor plate regardless of the projectile's velocity. A slow-moving rocket could penetrate what high-velocity anti-tank rounds could not. The first test firing took place at Aberdeen in May 1942. Skinner, nervous about the weapon's potential, set up a captured French Renault tank as a target at 50 yards. The rocket, a stubby cylinder with 4 fins welded to its tail, looked like a child's toy. The launcher, a simple steel tube with a rudimentary wooden stock and pistol grip, looked even less impressive. Skinner aimed, squeezed the trigger, and watched through binoculars as the rocket streaked downrange, trailing white smoke. The Renault's turret side armour, 40mm of hardened steel, developed a small circular hole. Inspection revealed a neat penetration completely through the armour with catastrophic damage inside the fighting compartment. Everything within 3 feet of the penetration point had been shredded by secondary fragmentation and thermal effects. Anyone inside the tank would have been killed instantly. The Ordnance Board, watching the demonstration, immediately ordered production of 5,000 units. By November 1942, as Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, approached, factories had delivered 8,500 bazookas and 25,000 rockets. American infantry would enter combat with a weapon German tankers had never encountered. But there was a problem. The bazooka was so new, so rushed into production, that proper training was impossible. Most troops received their weapons aboard ships during the Atlantic crossing. Ammunition was scarce. Practice firing was limited to a handful of rounds per squad. Nobody knew how the weapon would perform under actual combat conditions. Nobody knew if soldiers could hit moving targets. Nobody knew if the shaped charge would work against modern German armour. Private Simons and thousands of others were about to find out. The landing at Fadala, Morocco on November 8th was chaotic. Surf overturned landing craft. Equipment was lost in the darkness. Units became separated. French colonial troops, following orders from the Vichy government, resisted the American landings. By dawn, scattered firefights erupted along the beaches as American infantry pushed inland. Simon's platoon, part of Company K, 16th Infantry Regiment, advanced toward a fortified position on high ground overlooking the beach. Intelligence reported French armour in the area. Hotchkiss H-39 light tanks, 40mm of frontal armour, 37mm cannon. Against infantry without anti-tank weapons, these 1930s vintage tanks were deadly. Against the bazooka, they were about to become obsolete. The first engagement occurred at approximately 8:30 hours. Sergeant Alex Drabitsky, leading a squad from Company K, spotted movement in the scrub brush 200 yards ahead. A Hotchkiss tank emerged from cover, its commander visible in the open cupola, scanning for targets. The French tanker never saw the American infantry squad taking cover behind a low stone wall. Drabitsky, armed with a bazooka and exactly 2 practice rounds worth of training, loaded a rocket with shaking hands. His assistant gunner, Private John Wallace, connected the electrical firing lead to the rocket's igniter. The rocket was a crude device, a steel tube packed with rocket propellant, 4 stamped steel fins, and a 3.5-pound shaped charge warhead in the nose. Total length, 21 inches. Total weight, 3.4 pounds. Maximum effective range against armour, 300 yards. Drabitsky's hands were sweating despite the cool morning air. The tank was approximately 150 yards away, moving slowly across his front. He had been told to aim for the side armour, thinner than the frontal plate. He raised the launcher to his shoulder, aligned the rudimentary iron sights on the tank's hull, and squeezed the trigger. The rocket motor ignited with a crack and a blast of white smoke that momentarily obscured everything. The backblast, a cone of flame and gas extending 30 feet behind the launcher, scorched the vegetation and startled everyone nearby. The rocket, accelerating to 265 feet per second within inches of leaving the tube, streaked toward the Hotchkiss trailing smoke. Flight time was less than 1 second. The shaped charge warhead struck the tank's side armour at a slight angle, approximately 20 degrees from perpendicular. The impact fuse functioned perfectly. The high explosive detonated. The copper liner collapsed into a jet of molten metal that penetrated the 40mm side armour as if it were paper. Inside the tank, the jet and following blast of overpressure killed the crew instantly. Stored ammunition ignited. The Hotchkiss exploded, its turret lifting off and tumbling end over end before crashing back onto the burning hull. Total time from trigger pull to catastrophic kill, approximately 3 seconds. Drabitsky and his squad stared in disbelief. Nobody had told them the weapon would be this effective. The Hotchkiss, which moments before had been a deadly threat, was now a funeral pyre. Black smoke rose hundreds of feet into the African sky. The psychological effect was immediate. French troops who witnessed the destruction began surrendering. The prospect of facing infantry armed with weapons that could instantly destroy tanks terrified soldiers who had considered armour invulnerable. Word spread rapidly through French positions. The Americans possess a new weapon, a tube that shoots fire. It destroys tanks. Within hours, multiple bazooka engagements occurred across the landing zones. Near Port Lyautey, Private First Class James McCarthy knocked out 2 French tanks in quick succession, firing from a hastily dug foxhole as the vehicles advanced on his position. At Safi, Corporal Robert Patterson destroyed a French armoured car with a single shot at 75 yards. the shaped charge warhead punching through the vehicle's light armour and detonating the fuel tanks. By November 10th, organised French resistance had collapsed. The bazooka, though fired relatively few times, had demonstrated a capability that changed tactical calculations. Infantry were no longer helpless against armour. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. But the real test was coming. German forces, observing the Allied landings, began moving reinforcements from Libya and Tunisia. Among these forces were elements of the 10th Panzer Division and the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, equipped with Panzer Mark IV tanks and the first Tiger tanks deployed to Africa. These were not obsolete French cavalry tanks. These were modern fighting vehicles with thick armour, powerful guns and experienced crews. The bazooka's true trial was about to begin. In late November 1942, as Allied forces pushed east toward Tunisia, advanced units of the 1st Armoured Division encountered German armour for the first time. The engagement at Chuigi Pass on November 26th revealed brutal truths about American inexperience. German Panzer, Mark IIIs and Mark IVs, operating with practiced coordination and superior tactics, destroyed 18 American tanks in less than 30 minutes. American M3 Grant and M4 Sherman tanks, though numerous, were outfought by better-trained German crews. American infantry, supporting the armoured advance, suddenly found themselves retreating under German tank fire. Among them was 2nd Lieutenant William Watson of the 1st Infantry Division, assigned as a forward observer with an armoured unit. Watson carried a bazooka, though he had fired the weapon only once during training. As American tanks burned and German panzers advanced, Watson and 3 other soldiers took cover in a dried riverbed approximately 200 yards from the German line. A Panzer Mark IV, 20 tons of German engineering with 50mm of frontal armour and an excellent 75mm cannon, rumbled toward their position. Watson could hear the transmission whining, the tracks clanking, the engine roaring. The panzer commander, visible in the cupola, scanned the terrain with binoculars. Watson loaded a rocket, his hands remarkably steady despite his racing heart. The Mark IV was now 100 yards away, its bulk blocking the sun. Watson aimed for the side armour, knowing the frontal plate might be too thick for the shaped charge. He led the target slightly, compensating for the tank's movement, and fired. The rocket struck the panzer's side skirt, a 5mm steel plate designed to detonate shaped charge rounds before they reached the main armour. The warhead exploded against the skirt, its jet mostly dissipated by the standoff distance. The tank, barely damaged, swiveled its turret toward Watson's position. The 75mm cannon spoke. The high explosive round detonated 10 feet from Watson's position, showering his foxhole with rocks and shrapnel. Watson, stunned but alive, realised his mistake. The side skirts, a defensive measure he hadn't known about, had defeated his shot. He needed to hit the main hull above the skirts or find a different angle. His assistant gunner, Private Raymond Flores, loaded another rocket. The Panzer was now 75 yards away, still advancing. This time, Watson waited. The tank climbed a small rise, exposing its belly armour as the hull angled upward. Watson aimed for the lower front plate, fired, and watched the rocket streak toward its target. The shaped charge struck the 50mm lower glacis plate at nearly perpendicular angle. The jet penetrated completely, entering the fighting compartment and destroying the transmission. Burning transmission fluid ignited the ammunition. The Mark IV exploded with shocking violence, its turret blown 50 feet into the air. The blast wave knocked Watson flat. When his ears stopped ringing and his vision cleared, the Panzer was a burning shell. The commander's body hung from the cupola hatch. This engagement revealed critical lessons. The bazooka could kill German panzers, but only with proper shot placement. Side skirts and other defensive measures reduced effectiveness. Crews needed training on tank vulnerabilities. Most importantly, soldiers needed courage to let tanks approach within 100 yards before firing, within machine gun range to ensure penetration. Throughout December 1942 and January 1943, American infantry learned these lessons through brutal experience. The bazooka became the most sought-after weapon in any infantry company. Soldiers volunteered to be bazooka gunners despite the danger. The weapon provided psychological comfort. Infantry could fight back against armour, but German tankers were learning too. After losing several tanks to bazookas in small engagements around Majez el Bab and Tabourba, German commanders issued tactical instructions: maintain distance from American infantry, use machine gun fire to suppress bazooka teams before they could fire, angle armor to deflect shaped charge jets, add supplemental armor to vulnerable points. The adaptation was particularly evident with side skirts. By January 1943, most German tanks in North Africa had retrofitted Schürzen, thin steel plates mounted several inches from the hull. These skirts detonated shaped charge warheads prematurely, reducing penetration. American ordnance officers, analyzing recovered rockets and damage patterns, realized they needed to improve the bazooka. The M1 launcher, while revolutionary, had limitations. Its electrical firing system was unreliable in wet conditions. The battery frequently died at critical moments. The wooden stock warped in Africa's heat. The rocket itself was underpowered. Its maximum effective range of 300 yards meant infantry had to get dangerously close to tanks. The shaped charge, while effective against light and medium armour, struggled with the Tiger tank's 100mm frontal armour that began appearing in February 1943. The solution was the M1A1 launcher and improved M6A1 rocket. The new launcher featured a weatherproof firing mechanism, better sights, and a reinforced tube. The improved rocket carried a larger 4-pound warhead with better penetration. Most critically, Ordnance developed the M6A3 rocket with an extended nose probe that defeated side skirts by ensuring proper standoff distance when the main warhead detonated. These improvements arrived in Tunisia in March 1943, just as German forces launched their final offensive operations in North Africa. At Kasserine Pass in February, before the improved weapons arrived, bazookas had proven ineffective against massed German armour. The older M1 rockets bounced off Tiger tank armour or were defeated by side skirts. American infantry, facing panzers they couldn't stop, broke and retreated. The disaster at Kasserine revealed that the bazooka, while revolutionary, was not a universal solution, but by March, with improved weapons and better trained crews, the situation changed. The Battle of El Gueta on March 23, 1943 demonstrated the evolution of American anti-tank tactics. German forces, attempting to break through American positions, committed elements of the 10th Panzer Division, supported by Italian armour. The attack hit the 1st Infantry Division's defensive line at dawn. American artillery opened fire immediately, but the German tanks, veterans of 2 years of desert warfare, advanced in practiced formation, using terrain features for cover. At approximately 700 hours, lead elements of the 10th Panzer Division, 8 Panzer Mark IVs and 4 Mark IIIs, crested a low ridge 400 yards from American positions. The tanks, expecting to find demoralized infantry fleeing in panic as at Kasserine, instead encountered prepared positions and disciplined fire. Staff Sergeant Howard Ballinger, commanding a bazooka team in Company E, 18th Infantry Regiment, watched the German tanks through field glasses. He had learned painful lessons at Kasserine. Let them get close, aim for the sides or rear, wait for the perfect shot. The panzers advanced to 200 yards, then 150. Bollinger could see the tank commanders in their cupolas, confident in their armour's protection. At 100 yards, Ballinger gave the signal. 8 bazooka teams positioned in concealed foxholes across a 200-yard front fired simultaneously. 8 rockets streaked toward the German formation. The results were devastating. 5 direct hits, 3 Panzer Mark IVs destroyed outright, their crews killed by shaped charge jets that penetrated side armour and ignited ammunition. 2 Mark IIIs disabled, tracks blown off, crews bailing out under rifle fire. The surviving German tanks, suddenly aware they were in a kill zone, attempted to reverse. American artillery pre-registered on the avenue of approach opened fire. More bazookas fired. Within 5 minutes the German armoured advance had been shattered. 7 tanks destroyed, 2 disabled. The survivors retreating in disarray. German after-action reports from El Gueta expressed shock at American anti-tank capabilities. Hauptmann Ernst von Wietersheim, a company commander in the 10th Panzer Division who survived the battle, later described the experience during POW interrogation. We had been told the Americans were inexperienced, poorly trained, equipped with obsolete weapons. This was true at Kasserine. But at El Gueta they fought like veterans. The anti-tank weapons were everywhere. Small tubes that fired rockets. The rockets made strange sounds like ripping cloth. When they hit, tanks died. Our side skirts seemed to provide no protection. The Americans had learned to aim for gaps in the armour or to hit the rear deck. 3 tanks in my company were destroyed by these weapons, all 3 killed instantly, no survivors. We called the weapon Panzer tank terror, though I believe the Americans called it something else. Whatever its name, it made our tanks vulnerable. We could no longer advance with confidence. Every American foxhole might contain a weapon that could kill us. The psychological effect was profound. The term Panzerschreck would later be adopted by Germany for their own copy of the bazooka, the 88mm Raketenpanzer Buchs. But in early 1943 it referred to the terror German tankers felt when facing American infantry armed with bazookas. The weapon's effectiveness was enhanced by American tactical doctrine that emphasized combined arms. Bazookas didn't operate alone. They were integrated into defensive systems that included artillery, machine guns, anti-tank guns, and infantry rifles. When German tanks advanced, they faced a coordinated defense designed to channel them into kill zones where bazookas could engage at close range. Major General Terry Allen, commanding the 1st Infantry Division, understood the bazooka's potential and limitations. He issued tactical guidance that became standard throughout the North African campaign. Bazookas are ambush weapons, not assault weapons. Use terrain, concealment, and patience. Let the enemy tanks come to you. Aim for the sides and rear. 1 hit is better than 3 misses. Shoot and move. Never fire more than twice from the same position. Protect your bazooka teams with rifle squads and machine guns. The Germans will target them specifically. By April 1943, as Allied forces closed in on Tunis and Bizerte, German armour in North Africa was increasingly constrained by fuel shortages, spare parts scarcity and accumulating damage. But the psychological impact of the bazooka continued to affect German operations. Tank commanders became hesitant to advance into areas where American infantry might be dug in. This hesitation, this loss of confidence in armour's invulnerability, was as tactically significant as actual tank kills. Oberst Hans Kramer, captured in May 1943 and interrogated by American intelligence, provided remarkable insight into German perspectives on the bazooka. The weapon is crude compared to German engineering standards. The sights are rudimentary. The rocket is inaccurate beyond 100 meters. The launcher is simply a steel tube with a battery. Yet it is effective. More effective than our own Panzerfaust in some ways, because it can be reloaded and fired multiple times. What makes it dangerous is not the technology, but the tactical employment. American infantry are trained to work in teams. 1 man carries the launcher, another carries ammunition. Others provide security. They position themselves in depth so that if one team misses or is destroyed, another team engages. This is intelligent doctrine. The Americans understand they cannot match German armour quality, so they use quantity and tactics. The bazooka represents this philosophy perfectly. It is cheap to produce, simple to operate, and effective when used properly. These are dangerous combinations. The final German surrender in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, captured approximately 250,000 Axis soldiers and hundreds of tanks and vehicles. Among the captured equipment examined by American ordnance officers were German tanks showing bazooka damage. The analysis revealed fascinating details about shaped charge effectiveness. Penetrations through side armour were consistently clean holes approximately 20 mm in diameter at entry, expanding to 50 mm at exit. The shaped charge jet maintained coherency through 50 mm of steel before dissipating. Secondary effects inside the fighting compartment were severe. The jet fragmented after penetration, sending molten metal and steel splinters throughout the interior. Ammunition storage areas hit by jets invariably exploded. Fuel tanks penetrated by jets ignited immediately. Crew casualties from successful penetrations were universally fatal within the immediate vicinity of the jet path. German armour modifications in response to the bazooka included increasing side skirt thickness from 5mm to 8mm, adding concrete and spare track links to frontal armour, and developing tactical doctrine that emphasised long-range engagements where bazookas were ineffective. But the most significant German response was the decision to develop their own shaped charge rocket weapons. The Raketenpanzer Buchs 54, commonly called the Panzerschreck, was essentially a German copy of the American bazooka scaled up to 88mm. The Panzerfaust, a disposable single-shot weapon, was developed as a cheaper alternative. Both weapons were direct responses to American innovation. The bazooka had forced Germany, the world's leader in anti-tank technology, to adopt American concepts. By the time fighting in North Africa ended, the bazooka had become an iconic weapon of American infantry. Soldiers who initially doubted the crude-looking tube now trusted it with their lives. The weapon appeared in training manuals, propaganda films, and war bond posters. Back home, Americans read newspaper accounts of miracle weapons that allowed infantrymen to destroy tanks. The reality was more nuanced. The bazooka was not a miracle weapon. It was a tool that required skill, courage, and favourable conditions. Against Tiger tanks at long range, it was ineffective. Against well-trained German crews employing proper tactics, it was dangerous to use. Bazooka teams suffered high casualty rates because engaging tanks meant exposing themselves to machine gun fire. But the weapon provided infantry with a capability they had never possessed before: the ability to kill armour with a man-portable weapon. This psychological effect, this knowledge that they were not helpless, was perhaps the bazooka's greatest contribution. Soldiers fought with greater confidence knowing they had options against tanks. The lessons learned in North Africa shaped American anti-tank doctrine for the remainder of the war. Every infantry squad would include a bazooka team. Training emphasized shot placement, patience, and teamwork. Tactics integrated bazookas into combined arms operations rather than employing them as standalone weapons. These doctrines, tested in the deserts of Tunisia, would be refined in Sicily, perfected in Italy, and deployed with devastating effect in Normandy. The bazooka's evolution continued throughout the war. The M9 launcher introduced in 1943 was a two-piece design that could be broken down for easier carrying. The M9A1, appearing in 1944, added an optical sight and improved rocket. By war's end, American ordnance was developing the Super Bazooka, the M20 launcher firing 3.5-inch rockets, capable of defeating the heaviest German armour. But the fundamental concept remained unchanged from Leslie Skinner's original design, a simple tube launching shaped charge rockets. The German response to the bazooka ultimately validated American design philosophy. The Panzerschreck was heavier, more complex, and harder to produce than the American weapon. The Panzerfaust, while simpler, was disposable and could only fire once. The American bazooka struck a balance between effectiveness and practicality that German weapons never quite matched. In the broader context of World War II weapons development, the bazooka represented a particular American approach to military technology. Where German engineering emphasized precision, complexity, and maximum performance, American engineering emphasized simplicity, reliability, and mass production. The bazooka was not the most powerful anti-tank weapon. German Panzerfausts had larger warheads. British Piats used a different mechanism with some advantages. Soviet anti-tank rifles had longer range, but the bazooka was easier to produce, simpler to operate, and more reliable than alternatives. American factories manufactured over 460,000 bazookas during the war. Ammunition production exceeded 15 million rockets. This massive production meant every infantry squad could have a bazooka. Ammunition was plentiful enough for realistic training. Weapons lost in combat could be immediately replaced. The industrial capacity that built these weapons was as important as the weapons themselves. Germany could design sophisticated anti-tank weapons, but lacked the industrial capacity to produce them in necessary quantities. America's ability to manufacture hundreds of thousands of simple but effective weapons overwhelmed German technical sophistication. The human dimension of bazooka combat is often overlooked in technical discussions. Operating the weapon required extraordinary courage. Gunners had to let enemy tanks approach within 100 yards, close enough to see the crew's faces, close enough to be killed by machine gun fire in seconds. The backblast marked positions, drawing immediate enemy fire. Miss the first shot and survival was unlikely. Staff Sergeant Jake McNeice, a bazooka gunner with the 101st Airborne Division who trained on the weapon in North Africa before deploying to Europe, described the psychological challenge. You're standing there with a tank coming at you. 20, 30 tons of steel and death. Machine guns firing. Cannon seeking your position. Every instinct screams run. But you can't run. You have to stand there, aim carefully, and fire. If you flinch, if you rush the shot, you miss. If you miss, you die. The guys who were good with the bazooka had a particular kind of courage, not the charging into fire kind, the standing absolutely still while death approaches kind. Cold courage. That's harder than hot courage. I saw men do incredible things with bazookas. I also saw men freeze, Unable to fire as tanks overran their positions, nobody judged them. That weapon asked too much of men. The decoration records from North Africa show that bazooka gunners received disproportionate numbers of Bronze Stars and Silver Stars. Several received Distinguished Service Crosses. The citations describe similar actions: remaining in position under fire, destroying enemy armour at close range, saving infantry units from being overrun. These decorations reflect not just effective weapons employment, but extraordinary personal courage under the most terrifying circumstances imaginable. By the end of the North African campaign in May 1943, the bazooka had evolved from an experimental weapon to a standard infantry tool. American soldiers understood its capabilities and limitations. Tactical doctrine had been developed and refined through combat experience. Training programs incorporated lessons learned at cost in blood. The weapon that Private Robert Simons had carried ashore at Fadala in November 1942, barely knowing how to load it, was by May 1943 a mature weapon system employed by trained specialists using proven tactics. The statistical record of bazooka employment in North Africa is incomplete. Combat records from November 1942 through May 1943 document at least 47 confirmed tank kills attributed to bazookas. The actual number was likely higher, as many engagements went unrecorded or were attributed to other weapons. More significantly, the bazooka's presence influenced German tactical decisions in ways that are impossible to quantify. How many German attacks were called off because commanders feared bazooka-equipped infantry? How many tanks were positioned defensively rather than offensively because of bazooka threat? The psychological impact exceeded the physical damage. German military historians writing after the war consistently identified the bazooka as one of the most significant American weapons innovations of the war. General Major F.W. von Mellenthin, Chief of Staff of several Panzer armies, wrote in his memoirs that the bazooka represented a paradigm shift in anti-tank warfare. For the first time, individual infantrymen possessed effective anti-tank capability. This forced German armoured units to modify tactics, increasing the distance between tanks and infantry, reducing armour's effectiveness in combined arms operations. The American bazooka proved that simple, mass-produced weapons could be as strategically significant as sophisticated engineered systems. The development and deployment of the bazooka also reflected broader patterns in American industrial mobilization. The weapon went from concept to combat deployment in approximately 18 months. This required coordinating design work at Aberdeen Proving Ground, production at multiple factories, ammunition manufacturing at ordnance plants, training program development, and logistics to ship weapons and ammunition to North Africa. The speed and scale of this effort demonstrated American industrial capacity and organizational competence. By contrast, Germany took over 2 years to develop and field the Panzerschreck, despite having captured American bazookas to copy. The first Panzerschrecks reached frontline units in late 1943. German production never exceeded 300,000 units total, less than 2/3 of American bazooka production. German ammunition production was similarly constrained. These production differences reflected fundamental disparities in industrial capacity that ultimately determined the war's outcome. The bazooka's legacy extended beyond World War II. The weapon's basic design influenced anti-tank weapon development for decades. The M20 Super Bazooka served through the Korean War. The concept of man-portable shaped charge rocket launchers evolved into modern weapons like the RPG and AT-4. Today, every infantry squad in every modern army carries descendants of Leslie Skinner's simple steel tube. The shaped charge technology pioneered in bazooka warheads became foundational for anti-tank munitions. Modern kinetic energy penetrators and explosive formed projectiles are direct descendants of the Monroe effect weaponized in the bazooka. The tactical doctrine developed in North Africa, using patient ambush tactics and combined arms integration, remains relevant in contemporary infantry operations. In the Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, an M1 Bazooka from the North African campaign sits in a display case alongside a damaged German tank road wheel. The placard describes the weapon's specifications and service history. But the real story is in the details not mentioned on the placard. The wooden stock, cracked and repaired multiple times. The steel tube, dented and scratched from hard use. The electrical contacts corroded from desert sand and salt air. This weapon was not a museum piece. It was a tool used by frightened young men to kill enemy tanks at distances where they could see the faces of enemy crews. The blood and terror and courage involved in that use cannot be displayed in museums. When Private Robert Simons, who carried a bazooka ashore at Fadala in November 1942, was interviewed in 1987 for an oral history project, he was asked what he remembered most about the weapon. His answer was simple: the weight, not the physical weight. Though at 13 pounds plus rockets it was heavy enough, the psychological weight. Knowing that when tanks appeared, everyone looked at you. You were expected to step forward and stop a machine that weighed 20 tons with a tube and a rocket. That weight never left me. 50 years later, I still feel it. But I also remember the faces of the men I saved. The guys who were about to be overrun by German tanks until I stopped those tanks. That weapon gave me the power to save lives by taking lives. That's a complicated burden. I'm proud I carried it. I'm glad I never had to carry it again. The bazooka entered combat as an experimental weapon in November 1942. By May 1943, it had proven itself as an effective tactical tool and a significant psychological weapon. In the process, it changed armoured warfare forever. Infantry were no longer helpless against tanks. The era of armour invulnerability ended in the deserts of North Africa, destroyed by simple steel tubes firing shaped charge rockets designed by two engineers working in a Maryland proving ground. German pilots had laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt in 1943. German tankers laughed at American infantry in 1942. In both cases, the laughter stopped when American weapons demonstrated that industrial capacity, practical design, and determined soldiers could overcome any advantage. The bazooka proved that the most sophisticated armour could be defeated by the simplest weapons if those weapons were properly designed, adequately supplied, and courageously employed. The sound of a bazooka firing, the sharp crack of the rocket motor igniting, the whoosh of the projectile in flight, the explosion of the shaped charge striking home became as feared in German ranks as the thunder of P-47 guns. Both weapons spoke with American accents. Both weapons said the same thing. Technology, courage, and industrial might combined into unstoppable force. The skies belonged to America, the ground belonged to America, and the tanks that had conquered Europe discovered they belonged to whoever held a simple steel tube and the courage to use it. The tactical innovations developed in North Africa with the bazooka would be tested and refined in the Sicily campaign, beginning July 1943. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, presented different challenges than the North African desert. The terrain was mountainous, offering excellent defensive positions but limiting fields of fire. German forces, primarily the Hermann Göring Panzer Division and elements of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, were dug into prepared positions with tanks positioned as mobile pillboxes, rather than manoeuvring forces. Corporal Michael Chinchar of the 45th Infantry Division landed at Skogliti on July 10, 1943, carrying an M1A1 bazooka and 6 rockets. His squad's objective was a small town called Biscari, defended by Italian troops supported by German armour. The approach to Biscari ran through an olive grove that provided concealment, but channeled attacking forces into predictable avenues. German defenders had positioned 2 Panzermark to cover these approaches with interlocking fields of fire. Chinchar's platoon advanced through the olive grove at dawn on July 11th. The lead squad, moving through the trees, triggered German machine gun fire at approximately 200 yards. As American infantry dove for cover, the 2 panzers opened fire with high explosive rounds that shredded olive trees and showered attackers with wood splinters and shrapnel. The American advance stalled. Without suppressing the tanks, forward movement was impossible. Chinchar, observing from a shallow depression, realized the German tanks were stationary, engines off, conserving fuel. This was a new tactical situation. In North Africa, engagements had typically involved moving armour. Stationary targets required different approaches. He signalled his assistant gunner, Private Angelo Bertelli, and began crawling forward through the grove. The movement took 40 minutes, metre by metre, using every tree trunk and depression for cover, while machine gun fire cracked overhead and tank rounds exploded behind them. At 80 yards from the nearest panzer, Chinchar could see the tank commander's head and shoulders visible in the open cupola. Binoculars pressed to his face as he searched for targets. Chinchar loaded a rocket, aimed for the turret ring where armour was thinnest, and fired. The rocket struck slightly high, impacting the turret side armour at the junction with the cupola. The shaped charge jet penetrated, killing the commander instantly and entering the fighting compartment. The crew, suddenly aware they were under attack from an unexpected direction, attempted to traverse the turret. Chincha's second rocket, fired 15 seconds after the first, struck the turret front and penetrated completely. The ammunition storage erupted, blowing the turret off the hull. The second Panzer, alerted by the first tank's destruction, began reversing into better cover. Chincha, now exposed and under machine gun fire from German infantry, had no shot at the retreating tank, but Private First Class James Carambellis, another bazooka gunner who had worked his way up the right flank, fired from 60 yards at the reversing Panzer's thinner rear armour. The rocket struck the engine deck, penetrated the engine compartment, and ignited the fuel tanks. Both German tanks destroyed within 90 seconds by coordinated bazooka teams using patience and flanking manoeuvres. The engagement at Biscari demonstrated evolved American tactics. Rather than single bazooka teams engaging targets frontally, squads now employed multiple teams attacking from different angles. This crossfire approach complicated German defensive responses and increased kill probability. Even if one team missed or was suppressed, others could engage. The tactic required coordination, radio communication, and soldiers willing to maneuver under fire, but it proved devastatingly effective. Throughout the Sicily campaign, American infantry refined bazooka employment techniques. Staff Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 2nd Armoured Division, though primarily a tanker, observed infantry bazooka tactics and noted key lessons. Always attack from the flank or rear when possible. Use terrain to approach within 75 yards before firing. Fire and immediately displace. German tankers learn quickly and will suppress known bazooka positions with machine gun fire. Multiple teams are essential. One team draws attention while another fires. In urban terrain, fire from elevated positions down onto thin top armour. This last point proved critical during fighting in Sicilian towns. German tanks operating in urban environments were vulnerable to attacks from second and third story windows. Bazooka teams positioned in buildings could fire down at 30 to 40 degree angles, striking top armour that was often only 10 to 25 millimeters thick. Several Panzer Mark IVs were destroyed this way in Palermo, Enna, and other towns. Their crews killed by shaped charge jets penetrating through the engine deck or turret roof. German forces in Sicily adapted their own tactics in response. Tanks no longer operated without infantry screening. German infantry were tasked with identifying and suppressing bazooka positions before armour advanced. This worked when German infantry were present in sufficient numbers and properly coordinated, but as the campaign progressed and German forces withdrew under pressure, coordination broke down. Isolated tanks attempting to delay American advances became vulnerable targets. Oberst Wilhelm Schmalz, commanding the German forces in eastern Sicily, reported to Field Marshal Kesselring in late July that American infantry anti-tank capabilities had improved dramatically since Tunisia. The bazookas are now employed by well-trained teams using sophisticated tactics. They no longer fire from obvious positions. They maneuver to achieve flanking shots. They coordinate multiple teams. Combined with American artillery and air superiority, our armour cannot operate effectively. We lose tanks daily to these weapons. By the time Sicily fell in mid-August 1943, American forces had accumulated extensive combat data on bazooka effectiveness. Ordnance analysis showed that at ranges under 100 yards, the bazooka achieved approximately 70% hit probability against stationary targets and 40% against moving targets. Penetration success rate against Panzer, Mark IV side armour was nearly 100%. Against frontal armour, penetration dropped to 60% depending on impact angle and specific armour configuration. Against Tiger tank frontal armour, penetration was essentially zero, but side and rear shots could kill even the mighty Tiger. This data informed ongoing weapon development. The M9 two-piece bazooka, easier to carry and deploy, began reaching units in Sicily. The improved M603 rocket with extended nose probe showed significantly better performance against side skirts. American ordnance officers, studying captured German equipment, realized that German armor technology was advancing faster than American-shaped charge penetration capability. The Tiger tank, immune to bazooka fire from the front, represented a serious threat. Reports of even heavier German tanks under development suggested that a more powerful weapon would be needed. The solution was already in development back in the United States. The T-74 rocket, with a 3.5-inch diameter warhead carrying 9 pounds of explosive, could penetrate 11 inches of armour, enough to defeat any known German tank. But the launcher required to fire this larger rocket would not be ready until 1945. In the meantime, soldiers would make do with existing weapons and superior tactics. The Italian campaign beginning in September 1943 presented the most difficult terrain yet encountered. Mountains, rivers, prepared defensive lines, and determined German resistance created conditions where armour had limited mobility and infantry bore the brunt of fighting. Here, the bazooka proved its value not just as an anti-tank weapon, but as a versatile tool for bunker busting and fortification destruction. The shaped charge warhead, designed to penetrate tank armour, proved equally effective against reinforced concrete. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, American infantry encountered German bunkers with walls of reinforced concrete 18 inches thick. Standard high explosive shells and grenades barely scratched these fortifications, but bazookas, firing at point-blank range against bunker-firing slits, could penetrate the concrete and kill defenders inside. Technical Sergeant Paul Huff of the 3rd Infantry Division pioneered this technique during fighting at San Pietro in December 1943. German defenders in stone buildings reinforced with concrete had stopped multiple American attacks. Huff, armed with a bazooka and 8 rockets, worked his way to within 40 yards of a German strongpoint. He fired 4 rockets in rapid succession, each one striking the wall at slightly different points. The cumulative effect of 4 shaped charge jets striking within a few feet of each other shattered the concrete and stone, creating a breach large enough for infantry to assault through. Huff was awarded the Silver Star for this action, which was quickly adopted as standard procedure for reducing fortifications. The versatility extended to other targets. Bazooka teams discovered they could destroy German half-tracks, armoured cars, and trucks with single shots. They could blow apart German anti-tank guns and artillery pieces. They could even destroy German pillboxes by firing rockets down ventilation shafts. The weapon, designed specifically as an anti-tank tool, became a general-purpose demolition device. But the primary mission remained killing tanks, and in Italy, German armour was employed differently than in North Africa or Sicily. The mountainous terrain limited tank mobility to roads and valleys. German commanders positioned their armour in defensive positions covering key terrain, essentially using tanks as mobile artillery. This tactical employment actually made them more vulnerable to bazookas. Stationary tanks, even well-positioned ones, could be flanked by patient infantry, willing to manoeuvre through difficult terrain. The fighting at Monte Cassino in early 1944 illustrated this dynamic. German Panzer Mark IV tanks were positioned on high ground overlooking the approaches to the monastery. These tanks, dug in with only their turrets exposed, were nearly impossible to kill with conventional weapons. Artillery fire rolled off the sloped armour. Tank gun fire from American Shermans operating at long range was ineffective. But infantry, climbing the mountain under cover of darkness, could approach the German positions from unexpected angles. On the night of February 15, 1944, a bazooka team from the 34th Infantry Division climbed Monte Cassino through a ravine that German defenders considered impassable. The team, consisting of Sergeant Robert Neal and 3 other soldiers, reached a point approximately 50 yards behind a German tank position. At dawn, Neal fired a rocket at the rear of a Panzer Mark IV, striking the engine deck. The tank, its engine destroyed and unable to move, was abandoned by its crew. 2 other tanks in the same position, realizing they were now vulnerable to rear attacks, withdrew before they could be engaged. One bazooka team, through audacity and mountain climbing skill, had eliminated 3 tanks from defensive positions that had held for weeks. These small unit actions, repeated hundreds of times across the Italian front, demonstrated that the bazooka's effectiveness depended as much on tactical creativity as technical capability. Soldiers learned to think like hunters, stalking their prey, using terrain and patience to achieve killing shots. The best bazooka gunners developed reputations within their units. Men like Sergeant Jack Hallowell of the 36th Infantry Division, credited with 7 confirmed tank kills, or Corporal Stanley Morrison of the 1st Armoured Division, who destroyed 9 German armoured vehicles, became specialists whose expertise was sought by company and battalion commanders. The German response to effective American bazooka tactics evolved throughout the Italian campaign. tank crews became more cautious, refusing to advance without infantry support. German infantry were trained to identify likely bazooka positions and suppress them with machine gun and mortar fire before armour moved forward. In some cases, German forces used captured American bazookas against Allied tanks, though ammunition scarcity limited this practice. More significantly, German ordnance developed improved armour protection. The Panzer Mark IV ASFH, appearing in Italy in late 1943, featured thicker side armour and improved side skirts, specifically designed to defeat shaped charges. The Panther tank, beginning to appear in small numbers by early 1944, had sloped armour that could deflect shaped charge jets if struck at oblique angles. The Tigris and the new Tiger II had armour so thick that only perfect side or rear shots could penetrate. American ordnance officers studying these developments realised that the arms race was tilting toward armour. The M1 and M1A1 bazookas, revolutionary in 1942, were by 1944 becoming marginal against the newest German tanks. Penetration was still possible, but required perfect conditions and shot placement. The pressure to field the 3.5-inch Super Bazooka increased, but production challenges and competing priorities delayed deployment. In the meantime, American infantry developed techniques to maximize existing weapon effectiveness. One innovation was the use of multiple rockets fired in rapid succession at the same impact point. The theory was that the first rocket would disrupt the armour structure, making it more vulnerable to follow-up shots. Technical Sergeant William Chapman tested this technique at Anzio in March 1944, firing 3 rockets within 10 seconds at the frontal armour of a Panther tank. The first 2 rockets created visible damage but did not penetrate. The third rocket, striking within inches of the previous impacts, achieved penetration and disabled the tank. Whether this was due to cumulative damage or simple luck was debatable, but the technique was added to training doctrine. Another innovation involved coordinating bazooka fire with other weapons. Artillery or mortar fire could force German tank crews to button up, closing their hatches and limiting visibility. While buttoned up, tanks were more vulnerable to close approach by bazooka teams. Similarly, smoke rounds could conceal bazooka teams maneuvering for flanking shots. These combined arms techniques required coordination and communication, but they increased bazooka effectiveness significantly. By spring 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the breakout from Anzio and the assault on the Gothic line, the bazooka had become thoroughly integrated into American infantry tactics. Every rifle company had multiple bazooka teams. Training emphasized not just weapon operation but tactical employment, target identification, and coordination with supporting arms. Soldiers understood that the bazooka was a tool requiring skill, courage, and favourable conditions, not a magic weapon that automatically destroyed tanks. The combat records from Italy show the bazooka's effectiveness and limitations. Between September 1943 and May 1944, American forces in Italy reported approximately 180 confirmed tank kills attributed to bazookas. This represented roughly 15% of total German tank losses, with the remainder attributed to American tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, air attack, and mechanical breakdown. The 15% figure, while seemingly modest, was strategically significant. German tank strength in Italy never exceeded 400 vehicles, and losses could not be easily replaced. Every tank destroyed by infantry using bazookas was one less tank available for German counterattacks. The psychological effect remained as important as physical destruction. German after-action reports from Italy consistently mentioned American infantry anti-tank capabilities as a constraint on armoured operations. Commanders were reluctant to commit armour to situations where bazooka-equipped infantry might be present. This caution limited German tactical flexibility and contributed to their defensive posture throughout the Italian campaign. As planning intensified for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, American commanders studied lessons from North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. The bazooka had proven itself as an effective infantry anti-tank weapon when properly employed. But Normandy would present unique challenges. German defences in France were more sophisticated than anything encountered in the Mediterranean. German armour in France included not just Mark IVs and Panthers, but significant numbers of Tigers and the new King Tiger, virtually immune to bazooka fire from the front. The hedgerow terrain of Normandy would create close-range fighting conditions ideal for bazooka employment, but also provide excellent defensive positions for German forces. American ordnance rushed improved bazookas and rockets to England in preparation for D-Day. The M9A1 launcher, featuring better sights and improved reliability, became standard issue. The M6A3 rocket, with its extended probe to defeat side skirts, was stockpiled in huge quantities. Every infantry regiment scheduled to land in Normandy was allocated bazookas at a rate of 1 per rifle squad, an unprecedented level of anti-tank firepower. Training in England during spring 1944 emphasised the lessons learned in Italy. Realistic exercises pitted infantry bazooka teams against British tanks simulating German armour. Soldiers practised infiltration techniques, flanking manoeuvres, and coordinated team attacks. Veterans from the Mediterranean campaign served as instructors, sharing hard-won knowledge about what worked and what got soldiers killed. Private First Class John Barnes, training in England with the 29th Infantry Division, recalled the emphasis on patience and discipline. They told us over and over, let the tank get close. Closer than you think is safe. Closer than every instinct tells you is reasonable. Because at 150 yards you might miss. At 75 yards you won't miss. The difference between 150 yards and 75 yards is the difference between survival and death. That lesson was hammered into us until we could recite it in our sleep. The veterans also emphasised the importance of shot placement. Aim for the sides or rear. Never take a frontal shot unless absolutely necessary. Know your enemy's weak points. The Panzer Mark IV has thin armour around the turret ring. The Panther's side armour is vulnerable. The Tiger must be hit in the side or rear, period. Learning these details, studying silhouette charts, understanding armour thickness diagrams, became as important as learning to fire the weapon. On June 6, 1944, thousands of American soldiers carried bazookas ashore at Utah and Omaha beaches. The weapons, waterproofed and carefully protected, were among the most valuable equipment landed that day. But the Germans, learning from their experiences in Italy, had not positioned armour forward where it could be engaged on the beaches. German tanks were held inland in reserve, waiting to counterattack once Allied intentions became clear. The first major bazooka engagement in Normandy occurred on June 7th near Sainte-Mère-Église. Elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, holding the town against German counterattacks, faced assault by Panzer Markwers from the 100th Panzer Replacement Battalion. The paratroopers, lightly armed and isolated from supporting armour, relied heavily on bazookas for anti-tank defence. Staff Sergeant Leonard Funk, a veteran of Sicily and Italy, commanded a bazooka team covering the southern approach to the town. His position, a shallow trench behind a stone wall, offered concealment but limited fields of fire. The narrow road approaching his position channeled German tanks into a natural kill zone. Funk, calculating ranges and angles, decided to let the lead German tank pass his position before firing. This counterintuitive decision was based on Italian experience where engaging the lead tank often alerted following vehicles before they entered the kill zone. At approximately 1400 hours, 3 Panzer Mark IVs advanced towards Sainte-Mère-Église. The lead tank passed Funk's position at 40 yards. Funk, showing extraordinary fire discipline, held his fire. The second tank entered the kill zone. Funk fired, striking the side armour at the junction between hull and turret. Penetration was complete. The tank burst into flames. The third tank, attempting to reverse, exposed its thinner rear armour to another bazooka team positioned further down the road. Both tanks destroyed within 20 seconds. The lead tank, suddenly aware it was isolated and facing infantry with anti-tank weapons, retreated before it could be engaged. This engagement established patterns that would repeat throughout the Normandy campaign. German armour, constrained by narrow roads, stone walls and hedgerows, often advanced in column formations vulnerable to ambush. American infantry, taking advantage of terrain and using multiple bazooka teams, could destroy lead and trail vehicles trapping the column. The hedgerow terrain, while limiting visibility, also provided infinite covered approaches allowing bazooka teams to manoeuvre close to German positions. But Normandy also revealed the bazooka's limitations against heavy armour. On June 13th, elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division counterattacked American positions near Carentan with Tiger tanks. These massive vehicles, weighing 56 tons with frontal armour up to 100 mm thick, were nearly immune to bazooka fire except from the sides or rear. American infantry, attempting to engage Tigers frontally, watched their rockets bounce harmlessly off the thick armour or penetrate only superficially without causing significant damage. Lieutenant Robert Bowen of the 101st Airborne Division encountered a Tiger tank at approximately 80 yards during fighting near Carentan. He fired 2 rockets at the tank's frontal armour. Both struck the glacis plate but failed to penetrate. The Tiger, alerted to his position, traversed its 88mm gun and fired. Bowen survived only because he had already displaced after firing, a discipline drilled into every bazooka gunner. The Tiger continued advancing, impervious to infantry anti-tank weapons, until it was eventually destroyed by American tank destroyers using 76mm guns. These encounters with Tigers reinforced the need for the super bazooka, but that weapon would not reach frontline units until 1945. In the meantime, soldiers developed desperate measures for dealing with heavy armour. Some units experimented with massing bazooka fire, having 4 or 5 teams fire simultaneously at a single target, hoping that multiple hits might achieve what one could not. Others attempted to attack from elevated positions in buildings, firing down at thin top armour. A few particularly brave or reckless souls attempted to climb onto immobilised tanks and fire directly into hatches or vision ports. These desperate tactics reflected the reality that American infantry in Normandy faced the most capable German armour yet encountered. The Panther and Tiger tanks represented quantum improvements over earlier German designs. Their armour was thicker, better sloped, and more resistant to shaped charges. Their guns could destroy American Shermans from ranges where return fire was impossible. In tank versus tank engagements, German armour had significant advantages, but the bazooka provided infantry with a capability that offset German tank superiority in crucial ways. German armour could not advance without infantry support, because unsupported tanks were vulnerable to bazooka ambush. This forced German commanders to coordinate infantry and armour carefully, slowing their tempo of operations. It also meant that German tanks committed to infantry support could not exploit breakthrough opportunities because they had to move at infantry pace. The bazooka, simply by existing and forcing German tactical constraints, shaped the Normandy battle even when not directly destroying tanks. The Bocage fighting throughout June and July 1944 saw intensive bazooka employment. The close-range fighting conditions, with visibility often limited to 100 yards or less, created ideal circumstances for ambush. American infantry, learning the terrain and adapting tactics, achieved kill ratios against German armour that would have been impossible in open terrain. Bazooka teams, using hedgerows for concealment, could approach to within 50 yards of German positions and fire from multiple angles simultaneously. Sergeant Curtis Culin, the tanker who had observed infantry tactics in Sicily, made another contribution to infantry anti-tank warfare in Normandy. He developed the hedgerow cutter, welded steel beams attached to tank fronts that allowed Sherman tanks to burst through hedgerows rather than climbing over them. This innovation, widely adopted and known as the rhinoceros, allowed American armour to support infantry more effectively. The combination of American tanks equipped with hedgerow cutters and infantry with bazookas created combined arms teams that could penetrate German defensive positions despite German armour advantages. By late July 1944, as Operation Cobra broke German defensive lines and Allied forces began advancing rapidly across France, the tactical situation shifted. Mobile warfare replaced static defence. German armour attempting to delay Allied advances operated in small Kampfgruppen, battle groups consisting of a few tanks, some infantry, and supporting weapons. These battle groups would establish blocking positions, inflict casualties, and withdraw before being surrounded. American infantry pursuing German forces encountered these blocking positions repeatedly. The standard response evolved into a practice drill. Identify the German position, call artillery fire to suppress defenders, and force tank crews to button up. Maneuver bazooka teams using terrain to achieve flanking positions. Coordinate assault with covering fire from rifles and machine guns. This combined arms approach, refined through months of combat, allowed American infantry to reduce German blocking positions with minimal casualties. The pursuit across France in August 1944 demonstrated how thoroughly the bazooka had been integrated into American tactical doctrine. Infantry squads moved with their bazooka teams positioned to provide immediate anti-tank response. Upon contact with German forces, bazooka gunners automatically moved to flanking positions while riflemen fixed enemy attention frontally. The actions were reflexive, drilled through training and reinforced through experience. German forces retreating across France found themselves increasingly vulnerable to bazooka attacks. Tanks running low on fuel were forced to move slowly, making them easier targets. Crews exhausted from continuous combat were less alert. Equipment maintenance degraded, leaving tanks mechanically unreliable. Under these conditions, even a weapon with the bazooka's limitations became deadly. A tank with mechanical problems, low on fuel, crewed by exhausted soldiers, was almost defensively vulnerable regardless of armour thickness. The combat statistics from the Normandy campaign and pursuit across France are revealing. Between June 6 and August 31, 1944, American forces in France reported approximately 350 confirmed tank kills attributed to bazookas. Given that total German tank losses in France during this period exceeded 2,000 vehicles, the bazooka accounted for roughly 17% of kills. When considering that many German tanks were lost to mechanical breakdown, air attack or abandonment due to fuel shortages, the bazooka's contribution to actual combat kills was even more significant. More importantly, every German tank destroyed by infantry using bazookas was a tank that American armour and tank destroyers did not have to engage. This freed American armour to pursue exploitation missions rather than being tied to infantry support. It also meant that German armour could not compensate for numerical inferiority through superior individual tank performance. A Tiger tank immune to frontal bazooka attack could still be destroyed from the flank by a private with a $60 weapon. The psychological dimensions of bazooka combat continued to affect both sides. American infantry, knowing they possessed effective anti-tank weapons, fought with confidence even when facing superior German armour. German tank crews, knowing that every hedgerow might conceal a bazooka team, advanced cautiously and conservatively. This caution cost the Germans opportunities and initiative. The cumulative effect of thousands of small tactical hesitations, each individually insignificant, collectively shaped operational outcomes. As Allied forces approached the German border in September 1944, the nature of combat shifted again. German forces fighting on their own soil defended more tenaciously. The terrain, increasingly urban as American forces entered industrial regions, created close-quarters combat conditions. Urban warfare presented unique challenges and opportunities for bazooka employment. Buildings provided covered approaches and elevated firing positions, but also concealed German defenders and limited maneuverability. The fighting in Aachen in October 1944 demonstrated urban bazooka tactics. American infantry, clearing the city building by building, used bazookas not just against armour but against fortified buildings. The shaped charge warhead could blast through walls, creating entry points for assault teams. Bazooka teams positioned in upper-story windows could engage German armour in streets below, firing at vulnerable top armour. The weapon's versatility made it as valuable in urban combat as in open terrain. But urban combat also revealed new vulnerabilities. The backblast from firing a bazooka in confined spaces could injure the gunner and reveal positions to alert defenders. The flight signature, a trail of white smoke, was highly visible in streets and drew immediate counterfire. German infantry, learning American tactics, watched for bazooka teams and engaged them with snipers and machine guns before they could fire. Urban bazooka operations required careful planning, coordination with supporting infantry, and rapid displacement after firing. The final major test of the bazooka came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German forces, launching their last major offensive in the West, committed their best remaining armour, including King Tiger tanks, and new tank destroyer variants. American forces, caught by surprise and outnumbered, relied heavily on infantry defensive stands to delay the German advance. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces included the 101st Airborne Division and attached armour units. The paratroopers, veterans of Normandy, carried bazookas as standard equipment. When German armour attempted to break into Bastogne, they encountered determined resistance, including effective bazooka fire. On December 20th, Staff Sergeant Paul Holt and his bazooka team destroyed 2 Panzer Mark IVs approaching Bastogne from the north, firing from a concealed position in a tree line at 60 yards range. On December 22nd, Corporal James McNally knocked out a Panther tank that had penetrated American defensive lines, hitting it in the side as it passed his foxhole. These individual actions, multiplied across dozens of similar engagements, helped slow the German advance and buy time for American reinforcements to arrive. The psychological effect on German troops was significant. Waffen-SS soldiers, interviewed after capture, expressed frustration that American infantry refused to break and run when faced with armour. The bazookas were repeatedly mentioned as a reason why infantry held their positions. Knowing they could fight back against tanks gave American soldiers confidence to stand their ground. By January 1945, as German forces retreated from the Bulge, the bazooka had compiled a remarkable combat record. From its rush deployment in North Africa in November 1942 through 3 years of nearly continuous combat, the weapon had evolved from experimental to indispensable. It had forced changes in German tactical doctrine, influenced armour design, and provided American infantry with psychological confidence and practical capability to resist armour assault. The simple steel tube that Leslie Skinner and Clarence Hickman had developed in 1940 had changed infantry warfare as profoundly as any weapon of the war. The rocket that first punched through Panzer armour in North Africa had by 1945 destroyed thousands of tanks, shaped tactical doctrine, influenced operational planning, and proved that simplicity, mass production, and practical engineering could defeat sophistication and technical excellence. German Panzers had conquered Europe. American bazookas had helped stop them.